Sallie-Anne Huckstepp was born into a middle-class Jewish family in December 1954 and grew up in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Unfortunately for Sallie-Anne and her younger sister, their parents divorced when they were still in preschool. As a result, the girls were sent to live with their strict Jewish grandmother in North Bondi. The grandmother, the girls, plus Uncle Ike and Aunt Rose, occupied a 2-bedroom upstairs apartment. Despite the change, the girls realized their new home offered stability and security. They bonded with their aunt, who would often take them to the beach to play. Sallie-Anne attended the exclusive Dover Heights High School. She was an eager student who received good grades. She even did some modeling work as a child, appearing in a Grace Brothers and Farmers catalog. However, her world would soon be shattered when her father, Jack Huckstepp, remarried, and the girls were brought back home to live with their father and new stepmother. But there was trouble from the start. Sallie-Anne and her younger sister Deborah often got locked in a cupboard by their father. She didn't get on with her stepmother and her behavior became unruly. A friend remembers that the stepmother put a sign around Sallie-Anne's neck when she was 2 years old, saying, "I wet my bed," and made her walk up and down the street with it. Home became a place of violence and abuse for Sallie-Anne. Her relationship with her father became difficult, quickly deteriorating to the point that Jack Huckstepp phoned the children's court, requesting the removal of his teenage daughter from the family home. As a 14-year-old, she was sent to the Minder Remand Center in Lidcombe. After being released, she found a job as a waitress at the King's Cross Club, Whiskey A Go-Go. When she was 17, Sallie-Anne married Brian Huckstepp, who had a criminal record and was addicted to heroin. Together they moved to the mining town Kalgoorlie. To finance his addiction, Brian asked Sallie-Anne to prostitute herself to the miners, through which she became addicted to heroin as well. They moved back to Sydney, where Sallie-Anne was prostituted in the King's Cross area. When she gave birth to a baby daughter, Sasha, she hoped they would be able to get back on track, but the marriage ended soon after. Working as a prostitute on Darlinghurst Road, she soon came into contact with Vice Squad and Drug Squad detectives, to whom she had to make regular payments for them to turn a blind eye. At the age of 20, Sallie-Anne was ordered by the courts to undertake treatment at the now notorious private psychiatric hospital at Chelmsford, under psychiatrist Harry Bailey. It became infamous for the deep sleep therapy scandal which occurred in the years between 1964 and 1977. Patients were kept in a comatose state for days or weeks by massive doses of barbiturates. Patients were restrained, often shackled to the bed, and fed by nasogastric tube. While they were unconscious, most patients received about 10 electric shock treatments, generally without any muscle relaxant or anesthetic. This treatment led to the death of 24 people. After Bailey's treatment, Sallie-Anne nearly died, recalls her sister. She was down to 4.5 stones, Deborah says. She couldn't talk, she couldn't walk. They'd given her 14 shock treatments over 15 days. When Deborah flew in from New Zealand, she found her sister crawling around on her hands and knees. There was a lot of drugs being used in the eastern suburbs of Sydney in the early 80s. It was in 1981, through a drugs contact, that Sallie-Anne started a relationship with heroin dealer Warren Lanfranchi, recently released from Long Bay Prison and working as a heroin dealer and standover man. Meanwhile, in 1980, Roger Rogerson, a member of the New South Wales Police Force, was moved to the Darlinghurst Police Station. He was a top detective of the Armed Hold-Up Squad and was earmarked as a potential future police commissioner. At the time, the heroin market was going through the roof in the red light district of King's Cross, and the opportunity to make some extra cash was hard to resist. Neddy Smith was one of the top heroin distributors in the city, and he was raking the cash in. He and Rogerson formed a mutually beneficial business relationship. Warren Lanfranchi was a violent man, but with a romantic streak for women, and didn't judge how Sallie-Anne financially supported herself. It was he that helped her quit heroin. Not only did he help her get off the drug, but he also treated her better than any man before. For Sallie-Anne and Lanfranchi, it did not matter how short their union was. They had dreams that involved starting over afresh, somewhere far away. Warren Lanfranchi was working for Neddy Smith, a hardened career criminal and a crime boss who had a rap sheet that included murder, rape and human trafficking. Lanfranchi and Neddy Smith met and formed a business relationship while they were both incarcerated in jail. For Lanfranchi, Neddy Smith represented the ideal criminal. But unfortunately for Lanfranchi, he stole heroin from two well-connected drug dealers. One of those well-connected drug dealers was none other than Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson of the New South Wales Police Force. As soon as Lanfranchi realized whom he had crossed, he and Sallie-Anne went into hiding, fearing Detective Rogerson's reprisal for the theft. Their fear was well justified, as Rogerson had a sinister reputation in the streets of King's Cross. Therefore, when a journalist later asked Sallie-Anne why she and Lanfranchi couldn't simply return what they had stolen from Detective Rogerson, she replied, "Because we were terrified. Detective Rogerson has a reputation as being a killer. In fact, Warren was so terrified that he went and bought himself a gun, and he used to sleep with it next to the bed. because we were terrified that Rogerson was going to find out where we were and come and kill us both.
Detective Rogerson has a reputation as being a very evil man. There are a lot of very heavy criminals who are terrified of him. In fact, Warren was so terrified, he went and bought himself a gun and used to sleep with it next to the bed because we were terrified that Rogerson was going to find out where we were and come in and kill us both in our bed.
Lanfranchi asked Neddy Smith to negotiate a reimbursement payment with Roger Rogerson. Smith later claimed that Rogerson had instructed him to drive Lanfranchi to a meeting at Dangar Place in Chippendale and to disarm him in the car. Rogerson took 18 police officers with him to the meeting. He claims that he was attempting to arrest Lanfranchi on suspicion of 5 bank robberies. At the meeting in Dangar Place, Chippendale, Rogerson shot and killed Lanfranchi at close range with a .38 caliber special, one bullet entering below Lanfranchi's left ear and 14 seconds later a second bullet, the fatal shot, entering through the right side of his chest, passing through his heart and right lung. Lanfranchi was the 3rd man Rogerson had shot dead in a public place in 5 years. During the inquest into Lanfranchi's death, Rogerson claimed self-defense. He was supported at the inquest by Neddy Smith and police officers who were called as witnesses. The inquest found that on the balance of probabilities, Rogerson had been trying to arrest Lanfranchi, but refused to find that he had acted in self-defense. The matter went to the Supreme Court, but no action was brought against Rogerson, and he was exonerated and commended for bravery. After Lanfranchi's murder, the following day's newspapers screamed headlines such as, "When Lanfranchi confronted the police," which painted Detective Rogerson as a hero who confronted and overcame evil on the streets. The killing of Lanfranchi baffled seasoned police detectives as well as forensic officers. The gunshot that killed Lanfranchi was the second shot that Rogerson fired in close range. Why not arrest him after the first shot, as he was already severely wounded? After the disappointing verdict, Sallie-Anne, who had paid bribes to these corrupt officers for years, wouldn't let them take anything from her ever again. A line had been crossed as far as she was concerned, and she was willing to risk her life to reveal to the world the real Rogerson, who was masquerading under a law enforcement badge. 49 days after Lanfranchi was shot, Sallie-Anne and her father, accompanied by a lawyer, walked into police headquarters and detailed a string of allegations against the New South Wales police, including verballing, bribery, and the cold-blooded execution of her boyfriend. She made the following statement, which would eventually help lead to the Independent Commission Against Corruption and the Wood Royal Commission.
Just let me get it clear. The men who wanted to sell drugs to Warren were working for Detective Sergeant Rogerson.
That's right.
Now, how much was the heroin worth that Warren had now stolen?
Well, it was extremely high-grade heroin. It was worth $37,000 to Warren and his partner.
$37,000.
Well, it's common knowledge that the drug squad sells heroin.
I will tell you everything. I have the following criminal record. I have 31 convictions for prostitution. I have a conspiracy to defraud conviction which occurred shortly after I left Harry Bailey's tender care at Chelmsford. I then had 2 further marijuana convictions. A heroin conviction when I was loaded up by detectives Peter and Tomic at the Lido bar. I have a further use charge in which detectives Peter George and Youngblood were involved. In both the latter offences, significant sums of money were paid to the police to effect the outcome. While operating as a prostitute, I made regular payments to members of the Vice Squad over 10 years. I have been involved in a number of transactions which I referred to in my statement, which have involved substantial payment to members of the Drug Squad and other detectives relating to drug matters. I believe that the New South Wales Drug Squad and the Armed Hold-Up Squad are both totally corrupt and that they feed on the very activities which they are supposed to stop. Sallie-Anne also went to the media and gave extensive interviews, claiming that Rogerson had murdered Lanfranchi and had stolen $10,000 that Lanfranchi was carrying to bribe Rogerson to forget about the heroin theft. Sallie-Anne continued lobbying the media. A documentary about her life was made and she began writing articles for a monthly magazine. Sallie-Anne had this to say to Australian Current Affairs programme host Ray Martin. I have been paying the police for 10 years as a prostitute. My ex-husband was a criminal, and I paid the police many times for him. I would be quite happy to go on paying the police because it's a way of life, and it's the way you survive. But when the police become judge, jury and executioner, then somebody has to speak up. Somebody has to come forward. Somebody has to start somewhere and stop it. Everybody, no matter who they are, heroin dealers, murderers, thieves, everybody is entitled to justice.
When the police become judge, jury, and executioner, then somebody has to speak.
Witnesses who heard the shots on that day came forward and testified that contrary to Rogerson's claim that the bullets that killed Lanfranchi were successive, they had heard the time gaps between the 2 shots that Rogerson had fired. A picture started to emerge, and Detective Rogerson's explanation of the shooting didn't hold up to the facts. Though Rogerson's reputation suffered, he continued with his police work. His continued employment with the New South Wales Police Department would nearly cost an honest police officer's life, because Detective Mick Drury turned down Rogerson's bribe offer. He was shot through the window of his house. It was believed that Rogerson had used a contract assassin to carry out the hit. This was merely 3 years after the Lanfranchi murder.
There was a gap of about 12-13 seconds and we heard another gunshot.
On the evening of June 6, 1984, Mick Drury almost died when he was shot through the window of his Sydney home.
Sallie-Anne's life had taken a positive turn. Her boyfriend's murder and the fight for justice encouraged her to turn towards writing and becoming a journalist. Yet she knew deep down the thugs she had exposed had her in their sights. I am quite sure that the police would probably kill me. In early 1985 she began a relationship with 33-year-old drug dealer David Kelleher. She and her 12-year-old daughter had moved into an expensive apartment. When he left her, she started being involved in prostitution again, because she was having trouble paying the hefty rent. She also began dealing in small amounts of heroin. When David Kelleher got arrested for a fur theft, she made deals with the police to help him, raising distrust in the criminal underworld, especially when she started a relationship with federal police officer Peter Parker Smith. It was decided at this time that Sallie-Anne's daughter would go and live with her father.
I have to leave the country. I've upset the balance. A lot of detectives, I suppose, are going to be scared.
Sallie-Anne had a strong inkling that her life was in danger, but wasn't entirely sure. She thought that perhaps the public exposure would protect her, and it had in fact, at least for a while. Rogerson bided his time until the publicity faded, and then took a contract out on her life. On February the 6th, 1986, a person who identified himself as Warren phoned her just before 11 p.m. and asked her to meet him in Centennial Park. She appeared anxious after the call. She then left the apartment and told her flatmate she would return in 5 to 10 minutes. The next morning, a man was walking his dog through Centennial Park when he noticed the body of a woman floating in Busby Pond. After police were alerted, 2 uniformed constables rowed out and dragged the body in. But by the time Sallie-Anne was pulled out of the water, 5 years had passed. She had drifted back to street life, and no one was paying attention anymore. In a statement on Sallie-Anne's murder, Roger Rogerson told a reporter, "I was shocked when I learned that Sallie-Anne Huckstepp had been murdered here in Centennial Park. I think it was because she was a very attractive and a good-looking little bird, and she got a lot of sympathy from different people, including members of the media and the public. But she really was just a typical common prostitute." Even after her death, Rogerson showed contempt for a better soul than himself. Sallie-Anne would have the last laugh, though. One of the longest-running inquests was held into her murder. A recording of Neddy Smith bragging and confessing to an inmate about strangling Sallie-Anne emerged. He was recorded saying that, "Strangling someone is the hardest thing in the world, but the most satisfying thing I've ever did in my life." Smith later claimed he'd made the story up, as he knew he was being recorded. He went to trial for her murder, but was acquitted in 1999. No one has ever been convicted for Sallie-Anne's murder. The crime remains officially unsolved.
I just snapped her jugular. She must have been alive when I put her in. Left her floating there.
Sallie-Anne's fight with police corruption has forever silenced her voice, but it was already too late for Rogerson. Because of her bravery, Rogerson was fired and convicted of perverting the course of justice. Sallie-Anne was successful in stopping a psychopath from becoming a future police commissioner. He had been drinking with a prosecutor friend on the night of Sallie-Anne's murder, which had cemented his alibi, enabling him to slip through the net once again. However, in May 2014, Rogerson was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 20-year-old UTS student Jamie Gowo, who was lured into a trap for his large supply of crystal meth. Unbeknownst to Rogerson, CCTV footage had recorded him and his buddy disposing of Gowo's body. Neddy Smith died in Long Bay Prison Hospital on September 8, 2021. He was 76 years old. Rogerson is now 82 years old and rots in prison. Though late, justice had finally caught up with him. Sallie-Anne is remembered for her brave stance against corruption and was instrumental in shining a bright light on the so-called hero super cop.
Roger Rogerson was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of another young drug dealer, Jamie Gowo.
We're back to the Gestapo days now.
I'm innocent and I've been convicted on the perjured evidence of a criminal and a prostitute.
This is real. This is not something that I have made up in revenge or in anger. This is just cold, bare fact.
My dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Excuse me if my voice feels a little bit dull at the moment. I woke up feeling quite dreadful this morning. I'm not sure whether I'm coming down with something. Stomach cramps, had a headache all night. Generally feel crap. Of course, the world might be coming to an end. Then again, if I cease to be, then the world has effectively come to an end. So let's hope it hasn't. So, about this case, yeah, I did mention in some previous presentation, it was also an Australian vintage crime, that I was going to cover this story, and so I have. And I also mentioned at the time that I lived not far from where they found Sallie-Anne's body, and I can show you where I lived. Can you see the little hand down here? Well, I lived here, and up there is Busby's Pond, where they found her body. And I had just recently moved into my apartment, and I woke up and I heard that on the radio, and at the time I had no idea of the significance of this corpse floating in the pond. You know, there was a lot of drug addicts would get into Centennial Park in the dark hours, in the evening hours, so I just thought maybe one of them had unfortunately fell into the pond and drowned. And it wasn't until, years afterwards that the whole story started to unfold. Yeah, so I was here, and then I would cycle down here. After work, I would cycle down here. I was very fit in those days. And I used to cycle to work and back, and then afterwards I'd cycle, and I'd come in through here, and I would do laps and laps of Centennial Park. So I would pass Busby's Pond. We'll pull this down. You see it goes into a circuit here, and I would just do laps and laps, and I'd even be there after dark, but I wouldn't stay too late because it would attract, the drug dealers, drug addicts, homeless people, and other strange entities. Yeah, so it wasn't that far from where I lived, Very, very sad, now that I know the full story as the years unfolded. And the weird thing is, I watched a documentary about Detective Roger Rogerson many years ago, and this was before that he'd been convicted of killing the drug dealer Jamie Gow. So at that time it wasn't known that he actually was a murderer, and there was still that sort of grey area hanging around him. Did he have anything to do with Sallie-Anne's murder? And now, in all probability, he did. He didn't come across as a psychopath. Some parts of some aspects of his character were even quite likable. The fact that he was a self-confessed old school cop. You know, he didn't take any rubbish from delinquents. They used to carry a what do they call it? A baton. What do they call it in English? This sort of club that they carry around. I'm losing my English. I really am. So you know what I mean. It's going to come out. You'll all be screaming it out in the comment section. So he would carry his thing, and he would bash them around the head if they got out of order. And I thought, that's cool. We need that nowadays. There's too many delinquents just thinking they can do what they want and that they're above the law. We need some old school cops. As I say, at the time, in some ways, quite likable. And he described a pub that he would go to and where all these criminals met, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And I would go to that pub sometimes because it was near where I worked. There was a whole street that stretched for several suburbs, and a lot of companies I worked for over the years were along this stretch, and that pub was there. But we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, so this case has always stuck in my mind, and I was quite shocked when I did find out that he was involved in murder, even at that age. He was still cold-blooded in his methods, and definitely should have been part of the criminal underworld. And in fact, he was. He should never have been wearing a detective's badge. But there you go. So he's still in prison, never going to come out. It's where he deserves to be, of course. Poor Sallie-Anne. She knew in her heart that it was going to be a matter of time before he caught up with her. And he wasn't stupid. He was a sly dog. He bided his time. He was waiting for the right opportunity and used that Nettie Smith, who was also a vile character, to finish her off. And I looked at the post-mortem results. I might be able to find them in a minute, which showed that she had been alive when she was thrown into the pond. So that's absolutely terrible. Let's hope she was unconscious and didn't feel anything. So the Iron Duke is a very working class area, and I do remember I worked not far from there, and my work colleagues and myself would go there for drinks, sometimes after work. I didn't stay around too long. The place had a very depressing, dark energy. Didn't like it. It was all right for a few thirst quenchers after work, but I didn't want to hang around. It wasn't my turf. I didn't know at the time that it was one of his criminal haunts. Oh, I didn't know what was going on in the cellar too. I watched that documentary on Roger Rogerson, and he did mention that there was machine gun bullets in the wall in the cellar of the Iron Duke, and that there was tales of people being tortured down there. I'm going to see if I can find that documentary about Roger Rogerson where he talks about the Iron Duke cellar. Let me just see if I can find it, and I'll play it for you.
We're in the cellar, which is underneath the Iron Duke Hotel, a famous pub in the middle of Alexandria. And this cellar, I'm absolutely positive from what I've learned in the last 2 or 3 years, holds many stories, and I'm sure there are ghosts right in this building, right in this cellar where we're sitting now, of past criminals who came here alive and never left alive. This was the actual cellar where the toe cutter gang brought their victims. Now, if you look behind me, there is a beer chute which opens up. So in the old days, the old 18-gallon kegs, the big wooden ones, would be rolled down from there. They'd roll them down or hook them on a rope down the bottom here. Well, the story I got was that they'd open that door up and they just throw them in here, just throw them down here. They couldn't get out of here. Then they'd come in themselves. There was a stainless steel table which was here, and they'd tie them to the table And then, of course, they'd start questioning them as to where they had all their money stashed away, all their ill-gotten gains. And, of course, if they didn't tell them quickly enough, then they'd obviously remove their shoes and socks, and then with the bolt cutters, they'd start snipping their toes off one by one by one by one. He basically told us exactly what they did, and that was that they would cut their toes off. They would then obviously cut the body up, because, as I said, there's never been a trace of any bodies. Now, if you look around this room here, you've got coal rooms, you've got every facility for someone like the toe cutter gang, so they'd be able to put their victims away for the time being and slowly remove them in maybe plastic bags, bit by bit, until they completely disappeared. There's another story to do with this cellar, and it involves Ned. For everyone who's watched Blue Murder, there's a scene there where you see Ned and Richard Roxburgh playing me, and I think Abbo Henry and I think Chris Flannery, and we're all down here firing with our machine guns and shotguns and handguns and all sorts of guns. And if you look behind me again, you'll see the wall there, and there are bullet holes still there. They've been left after all those years. Now, there's something always made me think that Ned Smith knew more about this cellar than what he'd never ever spoken about it to me ever. But like the guy that told me the story about the toe cutter gang using this, I'm sure that probably Ned would have heard the same story. But that's one story that he never ever told me. But certainly they used to come down here and fire away and think they were, you know, wide earth and they were out in the bloody wild, wild west. But the proof of that shooting is there on the wall, which you can see. Plenty of bullet holes still there, and no doubt they'll be there for the rest of time.
Were you, tell me, you were portrayed as being down here. Did you have your machine gun down here, Roger?
No. Well, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I probably would have enjoyed it. But I was never invited to come down here.
Yeah, right, Roger. We believe you. Right. Yeah. I mean, he just goes on after that, sort of maintaining his innocence of all criminal actions and all criminal involvement. But in all probability, he was down in that cellar at some stage. I can imagine. You know, I didn't know that at the time when I originally watched that documentary. It just seemed like, you know, an old school cop telling a story about colourful underworld, but he was definitely part of it. Well, the story is really about Sallie-Anne and not about the Iron Duke. I thought I would include that because for me it's interesting. I hope you found it interesting too. A side of Sydney that you don't often get to hear about. You hear about Bondi Beach and sun and surf and the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, but you don't really hear about these sleazy underworld tales. I'm here to bring them to you. Yes, Sallie-Anne, a brave lady, definitely not to be judged by her chosen profession. She was a very brave soul who decided enough was enough, that she wasn't going to just let that go over, the killing of her lover, and let his death be without justice, and she forfeited her life for that. But in the end it paid off, because my goodness, if she hadn't spoken up, Mr. Roger Rogerson might have been police commissioner. He was such a hero cop. She stripped the veneer off that. Rest in peace, my dear. Rest in peace. And I hope you're having a glass of wine up there, and I shall certainly clink glasses with you when my time comes. My dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Who knows what's coming next? Stay tuned. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.